Like every other hiker, I had numerous camping stories to tell. Some are horrible, while others involve incidents we hikers usually face. These incidents don't frighten us, but often leave us with unanswered questions. Why did it happen? Who was there? We never seem to get answers to such questions. Something like this happened to me almost every time I went to the Appalachian Trail. This particular incident took place in 2016, when I went there with my girlfriend, Emily. We arrived in the afternoon. The cabin was awesome, with a cute and simple fireplace and large windows offering a panoramic view of the forest. We did everything that day, shifted our things inside, cooked dinner, and enjoyed it outside near the campfire we set up. As night fell, Emily started feeling uneasy. According to her, the silence felt strange. I tried to pacify her, explaining that it was normal in the forest, but nothing eased her worry. I hugged her and took her inside. We went to our room, and she slept beside me. I, however, was still awake. I sat up, took out my book from the drawer, and started reading. The only sound at that time was the crackling of the fire. The atmosphere was cozy, and I felt a deep sense of contentment. My left hand was gently running through Emily's hair while my other hand held the book. I had read a few pages when I started feeling thirsty. I got up and walked out of the room, but as I stepped into the hallway, I noticed muddy footprints on the floor. My thirst forgotten, I began tracing where they started and where they led. The footprints went to the kitchen. Once there, I had a glass of water, but my thoughts were consumed by the footprints. Maybe Emily went to the kitchen after coming inside and forgot to change her shoes, I thought. Then I wondered if the washrooms were dirty, and she had walked there barefoot after using them. I went to every room and washroom, but all were clean. Finally, I returned to our bedroom. I didn't want to wake Emily. She had already been so unnerved by the eerie silence earlier. Still, I thought it was best to ask her now, because if she woke up on her own and noticed the footprints, she might panic. Slowly running my fingers through her hair, I leaned in to whisper, "Honey, did you go to the kitchen?" A sleepy no came from her. I was now certain she hadn't. There would have been a water bottle on my side table if she had. I kissed her cheek and sat against the base of the bed. As I tried to make sense of the situation, I turned to pick up the water bottle I had just brought, and that's when I noticed footprints near the bed, too. I retraced them from the kitchen to my room. The last step led to the window, which I now saw had been forced open, the latch broken. Someone had been in our cabin. I wasn't sure who, but I was deeply worried for Emily. I didn't want the intruder to emerge while she was awake, as it would terrify her. I grabbed a flashlight and checked every room again. Methodically, I inspected each space, every closet, and even under the beds. Finally, I approached the storeroom. It was small, cluttered with old tools and boxes. I swept the flashlight beam around but found no one. The cabin was empty. Yet, the footprints told a different story. Someone had entered and left without a trace, leaving only the muddy evidence behind. I took pictures of the footprints before wiping them away, fearing that if Emily saw them in the morning, she'd be even more frightened. Returning to the bedroom, I tried to distract myself. I grabbed some chips, peanuts, and biscuits, opened Netflix, and started watching a mindless show. Episode after episode, I kept the volume low and lost track of time. Before I knew it, it was 5 a.m., and I was finally starting to feel sleepy. Setting everything aside, I lay beside Emily, cuddling her tightly. I don't remember when my eyes closed. The next day started at 11 a.m. for me, though Emily had woken up at 9. I was roused when she patted me, pushed me gently, and whispered in my ear, "Honey, please, wake up. I'm afraid." Her fear made me sit up instantly. "Yes?" I asked. "Relax. It's nothing like that. Can we please leave for home now? I'm not feeling okay here." "Okay, sure," I nodded, opening my arms to hug her. A hug was my first dose of the day, after all. I knew how she felt, and I didn't want her to suffer anymore. We packed our bags in record time, changed our clothes, loaded the car, and drove away. The headlights cut through the dense forest as we left. The drive back to the city was fine, though Emily remained silent, which I didn't like. We stopped at a cabin cafe for some food to help her relax, then continued our journey home. When we finally reached, I collapsed on the couch in the living room, and Emily lay beside me in my arms. She took weeks to get back to her normal routine. For me, it was just another story, so nothing bothered me except the lingering questions. Who was the intruder? Where had they been hiding? What was their motive? And so many others. People think that if you live in the deep woods, spirits and weird noises do not harm you. It's not like that. We experience them too, and most of the time, they haunt us, but we find ways to combat it. Instead of staying up late at night, we sleep early because spirits are less likely to haunt you during those hours. I have experienced many incidents. Most of them are weird, but not too frightening. One incident happened in 2018 when I was living at my grandma's home on the Appalachian Trail. It was my favorite home, a small house with a vintage vibe that had everything you needed. My days there used to be slow and romantic, no worries, no hustle and bustle of the city. At that time, I was about to move to Houston, so I was just like a guest there for the time being. Grandma had passed away, so I lived there alone. Since the property was to be divided between her kids, I had to leave. My boyfriend, a city guy, arranged a home for me. I paid him with the money I earned from freelance work and from working at a small agricultural company. The house he arranged was under renovation, so I thought to stay a bit longer at Grandma's house. While living my last days there, one Tuesday at noon, someone knocked at the door. I was reading a book in my room. As expected, I walked out to the living room to open the door, but there was nobody. I went back to my room, finished the chapter, and started cooking a meal. While I put the pasta in a pan to boil, there was another knock. I went out and opened the door, but again, there was nobody. I started feeling weird, wondering what was going on, but I got back to my chores. The meal was prepared, and banana bread was baked. I just sat down to eat when there was a knock again. This time, I didn't open the door directly, but looked out from the window and saw someone standing there. When I opened the door, nobody was there. I was puzzled. I went back, had my food, and went to bed. At 7 p.m., I got into bed, and by 7:30, I might have dozed off. I woke up at around 2 a.m. to a distinct tap, tap, tap on the window, which jolted me awake. The sound came from the window facing the backyard. I sat up, thinking maybe somebody needed help, a neighbor or a hiker. Rubbing my eyes, I carefully got out of bed, grabbed the flashlight from the side table, and walked to the window. I shone the light into the backyard, scanning the dense woods, but I saw nothing. Dismissing it as a branch brushing against the glass, I went back to bed. The next day, everything seemed fine. There were no unnecessary knocks, just one from a neighbor who came to gift me a shawl as a farewell present. However, that night, the knocks began again. This time, I didn't sleep. I kept Netflix open with a mindless show playing, snacks by my side to distract myself, but stayed alert. Unlike the previous night, the knocking was louder and more deliberate. Each knock was perfectly spaced, as though whoever or whatever was outside wanted to ensure I heard it. I mustered the courage to step outside and investigate. The cold night air bit at my skin as I shone my flashlight across the yard. Still, there was nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone, just the stillness of the woods. Though I watched the whole show, confusion ran through my mind. I finally fell asleep in the morning and woke up at 11 a.m. After getting fresh, I skipped breakfast and went straight to Ashley's home, the neighbor who had gifted me the shawl. I told her about the knocks. "Probably just a raccoon," she said. but I'll swing by tonight to check it out if it happens again. I also mentioned it to another neighbor, Carl, who lived about a mile down the road. Carl, a rugged man who had lived in the area his whole life, gave me a skeptical look. True to his word, Carl came over that evening and sat with me in the dimly lit living room. The clock ticked away the hours, and just as I began to believe the knocking wouldn't return, there it was. Tap, tap, tap. Carl and I both looked toward the door. He gestured for me to stay put and crept toward the window. With his flashlight in hand, he threw open the door and stepped into the yard. "Nobody's out here," he called, his voice echoing in the night. "Probably just the wind playing tricks." But his expression told me he wasn't so sure. He lingered for a while longer before heading home, leaving me alone once more. Over the next few days, the knocking became more frequent morning, noon, or night. It followed no discernible pattern. Sleep became impossible, but I tolerated it, thinking I was safe as long as I had shelter. Finally, I found proof. The next day, I discovered large, erect footprints around my house. I took pictures and called police. After 3 hours, the police arrived. They investigated the area, but found nothing, no one, no tracks beyond the footprints I'd already photographed. Though upset, I wasn't too bothered because it was my last day there. I packed my things and spent the night at Ashley's house. I handed her the keys the next morning and left the place forever. It's been years now. I visit once a year for a day. I meet people and recall those events, but we've grown used to them. Forest is a place where you should always sleep early because you never know if spirits will wake you up at midnight or not. So, it's better to rest before they do. I was a kid, not more than 12 years old, when I went with my parents to the Appalachian Trail. We went alone, just me, Mom, and Dad. Mom and Dad booked a cool cabin in the deep woods. They were pretty excited, and so was I. The first few days passed like a dream. We explored the trails, roasted marshmallows over the fire, and played board games at night. But one night, something happened that I'll never forget. It was late, and my parents had gone to bed after dinner. I wasn't sleepy, so I stayed in the living room playing games on my tablet. The cabin was quiet, except for the faint rustle of the wind outside. Occasionally, I'd hear the chirping of crickets or the distant hoot of an owl, but it didn't bother me much, so I kept playing. As I sat there, I heard a deliberate knock on the window. I looked up from my tablet to the window and saw a man whose face was pressed against the glass. At first, I thought he might be a neighbor or someone lost in the woods, but he seemed creepy. He was staring straight at me. His smile was too weird, giving me fear with eyes that were too wide, as if he was overly excited to see me. I froze, unsure of what to do. The man brought his hand near the window. He had pointed nails and a knife, too. A smart use of it could break the window. "Hey there," he said, his voice muffled through the glass. "You must be Kevin. I'm a friend of your mom. She told me all about you." His tone was friendly, but I was confused. How did he know my name? My mom had never mentioned a friend staying nearby. Otherwise, we wouldn't have rented the cabin. My heart started racing. I gripped my tablet tightly, unsure of what to say. "You can open the window," he continued. "I just want to say hello." "Your mom said it's okay." I shook my head, instinctively stepping back from the window.
Every part of me screamed that I shouldn't trust him.
"No," I said firmly, my voice trembling. "I don't know you. Please, come tomorrow. Mom is sleeping right now." His smile faltered for a moment, but then it returned, wider and more menacing. "Come on now," he said, tapping on the glass with his finger. "Don't be rude. Let me in." My chest felt tight, and my hands were shaking. "Go away," I shouted, hoping the sound would wake my parents. That's when I saw him try to open the window using the knife he had. My heart now jumped to my mouth, and I bolted from the living room, running straight to my parents' room. I threw the door open and leapt onto their bed, shaking my dad's arm furiously. "Dad! Mom! There's a man outside." They both jolted awake, confused. "What are you talking about?" my mom asked, sitting up. "There's a man at the window," I cried, pointing toward the living room. "He was trying to get in." Dad grabbed a flashlight and hurried to the front of the cabin while Mom stayed with me. I clung to her, my heart still racing. When Dad returned, he looked puzzled. "There's no one out there," he said, scanning the room. "Are you sure you saw someone?" "Yes, Sess," I insisted. "He was standing right there, and he tried to open the window." Mom wrapped her arms around me, trying to calm me down. Meanwhile, Dad went outside to check the area and make sure no one was lurking in the shadows. He called the police, and soon their car was there. They investigated the whole area. One of the officers examined the window and confirmed what I had seen, as there were signs of tampering on the glass. "It's clear someone tried to force it open." The officer knelt down to talk to me. "You did the right thing by not opening the window," he said with a kind smile. "You're very brave." That night, I slept in my parents' room, curled up between them. Even with them beside me, I couldn't stop thinking about the man, his creepy smile, the way he called my name, and how close he had come to getting inside. Instead of staying for more days, we left the cabin the next morning. My parents didn't want to take any chances, and frankly, neither did I. The whole way, we all stayed silent. Dad and Mom tried to lift my mood, but I was stuck in the past. We stopped on the way at a local store to get ice cream and have pasta, but nothing helped. After some hours, we were home. Dad and Mom slept, but I couldn't. After all, it all happened to me for the first time. When school started, I returned to my normal routine, so it didn't bother me much. Yet, I told everyone about it. However, it stayed with me. So, after 2 or 3 years, I started reading about the Appalachian Trail and came to know a lot of weird stories around there. Then I realized spirits do get offended by our presence. I lost a wife when I was an adult, but my daughter lost a mother when she wasn't even an adult. She lost her confidants. She had no idea how to live without her. The funeral was done, the family gone, and we were by ourselves, 2 chairs filled and the third empty. That emptiness could be felt everywhere. We needed time to accept reality. Time to step away from the world and understand each other so that a father and daughter could figure out how to live together. That's why I decided to rent a cabin in the woods, in the Appalachian Mountains, a place where we could try to find some peace. The silent drive helped us reach the cabin. Like the journey, the first day also passed quietly. The cabin was small, but cozy, with some campers nearby. We could see them, but not hear their voices. Emma wasn't thrilled about being away from her friends and phone signal. She was there because of me. She was the least excited person. Yet, the second day was eventful. We had an argument, though I don't even remember what sparked it. Maybe it was the cabin's isolation, or maybe it was just the grief boiling over. Emma accused me of running away from our problems instead of facing them. Her words stung, but they weren't entirely wrong. My frustration got the better of me, and I stormed out of the cabin to clear my head. "I'm going for a hike," I said sharply, grabbing my jacket. "Fine," Emma muttered, slamming the door to her room. I didn't mean to leave her alone for long. I just needed space to think, to breathe. The trail I took wound deep into the forest, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm in the rustling leaves and the chirping birds. It all helped quiet the storm in my mind. I was miles away from the cabin when my phone buzzed in my pocket. The signal was weak, but I could see it was Emma calling. "Dad!" she screamed as soon as I answered. Her voice was filled with terror. "There's someone outside the cabin. I heard a gunshot." My blood ran cold. Whether you're the bravest man on earth or not, when your family is in trouble, it spouts your blood. The same happened to me when she called. I stood up. Emma, lock the doors. Stay in your room. I'm coming back. I shouted, already turning back toward the cabin. My mind raced as I sprinted through the woods. Who could it be? A hunter? A drifter? Or worse? Was he hurting her, or had he not seen her yet? The hike back felt too long. It seemed never-ending. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf made my heart pound harder. I kept replaying Emma's panicked voice in my head, her scream ringing in my ears. When I finally reached the cabin, it was weirdly quiet, as if nothing had happened. Emma, I called, bursting through the door. She ran out from her room and threw herself into my arms, shaking. I heard it, Dad, she sobbed. It was so loud, and I saw someone outside, near the trees. I hugged her tightly, trying to calm her while my own anxiety spiraled out of control. My heart was pounding back into place as I held her. Nothing had happened to her except those fat tears in her eyes and the fear that had made her pale. I made her sit on the sofa and held her hand. With my other hand, I called the authorities immediately. Within 20 minutes, a police car pulled up the dirt road leading to the cabin. 2 officers stepped out, armed and alert. They searched the area thoroughly, combing through the trees and bushes with flashlights. Emma and I stood by the cabin, watching nervously as the officers worked. After what felt like hours, they returned. We didn't find anyone, one of the officers said. No footprints, no shell casings, nothing to suggest someone was here. Are you sure you heard a gunshot? Emma nodded fervently. I swear I did. It was loud, like it was right outside. The officers exchanged a look. Could have been a hunter in the distance, or even something like a branch snapping, the other officer suggested. But we'll file a report and keep an eye on the area. Although they assured us, we were both uncomfortable staying there. Emma was visibly shaken, and the fear in her eyes was enough to make me question everything. I thanked the officers, and they left, their flashing lights disappearing into the darkness. That night, the cabin felt disturbing. Emma refused to sleep in her room, so we camped out in the living room together. Every creak of the cabin and rustle of the wind outside made us jump. The next morning, I made a decision. We're leaving, I told Emma. Her relief was visible in the slight smile on her lips. Thank you, Dad, she whispered, hugging me tightly. We packed our things quickly, not wanting to spend another moment in the cabin. As we drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone staring at us from the woods. The cabin was supposed to be a place of healing, but it gave us another fear. Yet, I was still happy we went there. That fear or incident brought Emma closer to me after my wife's death. She had stopped talking to me after her mother's demise. Now, she was looking at me, sharing her thoughts. It was temporary, though. She took her time to accept reality and understand my point of view. We came home safe. For a while, we were each other's support system. I stood behind and beside her, helping her feel safe. A few days later, she started going back to school and slowly returned to normal. I also got busy with work. With time, she became my best friend. Now we go camping together, encountering different adventures, but nothing affects us much anymore. Orders were dispatched, and we were done for the month. That's why Mark, my husband, and I decided to go to Hocking Hills State Park for 4 days. We booked a cabin and just set off for adventure. As usual, we reached after a few hours. The cabin was perfect. It was exactly like what we saw in the pictures. The first day was spent relaxing. We hiked through the trails, took photos of waterfalls, and cooked dinner together in the small but cozy kitchen. Our second day was spent exploring the place, after which we settled in the living room. I curled up on the couch with a book while Mark stoked the fireplace. The warm crackle of the flames filled the room, and I felt at peace. However, soon there was a knock on the door. I thought a neighbor or some other camper might be there for help. Mark simply stood and walked to open the door. Yet, as he opened it, he just got into his active mode because a man collapsed on our porch as soon as the door opened. "Hannah," he yelled, asking me for help. I dropped my book and marched to the door, helping him to take the man inside. Because of our fear, anything could happen in the forest, we laid him down on the couch in our living room. I made Mark sit with him while I locked all the doors, and then came back to Mark. The man was in a horrific state. There was a deep wound on his stomach, oozing blood onto the wooden floorboards. He was trembling and pale, barely able to lift his head. "Help me," he croaked, his voice raw and weak. "Please." Mark grabbed a towel from a nearby chair, pressing it against the man's stomach to try to stop the bleeding. Meanwhile, I pulled out my phone from my back pocket to call police. The operator's hello startled me into action, and I quickly conveyed all the details. While explaining everything, I kept looking at the man on our porch, his face, the jagged gashes that looked as if someone had tried to carve him up. His eyes darted around frantically, as if searching for someone or something. "Who did this to you?" Mark asked, his voice tight with urgency. "Okay, we'll be there in an hour or two," the dispatcher said, cutting the call. I sat there with Mark and could see that the man was trying to speak, but his words were garbled. He kept shaking his head, muttering something we couldn't understand. His blood was dripping onto the porch, and his wide, terrified eyes haunted me. "Honey, we need to call the police first," I said to Mark. "Don't worry, the police will come with the medical professionals," he assured me. 2 minutes later, the sound of sirens reached us. Paramedics and police officers arrived, taking over the scene. Mark and I stepped back, letting them work. The man was loaded onto a stretcher, still conscious but barely. One of the officers asked him questions, but he was too weak to respond. They rushed him into the ambulance and sped away, leaving us with nothing but a bloody porch and 100 unanswered questions. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his bloodied and terrified face. The image was burned into my mind, replaying over and over. The sound of his voice, the way he had begged for help, echoed in my ears. Mark tried to comfort me. "You did everything you could," he said, wrapping an arm around me. "He's in good hands now." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Who had attacked him? Why had he come to our cabin, of all places? And the way he looked at us, it was as if he'd seen something far worse than we could imagine. The next morning, a police officer came to the cabin to ask us more questions. They hadn't been able to get much information from the man before he passed out in the ambulance. He was alive, but in critical condition. They assured us they'd investigate and let us know if they learned anything. Mark and I decided to cut our trip short because the incident had affected both of us. We packed up that same day and left for home. On the way, we stayed at a motel to process everything and then went home. For 3 days, his image haunted my mind, but after that, huge orders at work kept me focused. It's been years now, but I could never forget his face. I still go on trips and meet people, yet I have never seen a person so terrified and desperate for help. I contacted the police once I was home to ask about him. Thankfully, I learned he had gotten better and returned home. Through the hospital, I got his family's number. I contacted them and came to know that he was very thankful to us. Mark and I also visited his home and talked to him. He was a veteran who had gone to the area to spend some time in nature, but saw someone running behind him. In the panic, he hit a tree, which slowed him down and allowed the person chasing him to attack. Despite his injuries, he managed to escape and reach our cabin. I am happy that we helped him. After that incident, he never went back to that place and lived a few more years. Last year, he died in his son's arms. We went to his funeral. Life is pretty brutal, And the forest is the most brutal of all.